Jocelyn Brewer, you're very welcome to the Happy Habit podcast, and congratulations on your recent cyber psychology masters. What exactly is cyber psychology?
Yeah, it's a thing that didn't exist when I started in this field probably 13 years ago. So cyber psychology is really just when psychology mashes together with technology, and cyber itself means helmsman or navigating. So yeah, it's I guess about how we navigate through the digital technologies when it meets human behavior and emotions and things like that. So a very new field, one of those jobs of the future that we keep talking about the young people will have. And here I am with the job of the future.
So you're basically a pioneer then?
Oh, absolutely. A digital pioneer.
Well, technology has changed really the way we do everything, from how we shop to how we bank to how we consume information to even how we date. And I'm trying to figure out my own relationship with technology. It's kind of a love-hate relationship, I think. The genie is out of the bottle. We can't put it back in. And I'm trying to figure out, is technology a force for good?
Oh, I wish I had the answer to that. I think that technology is a tool, and how we use it really depends on whether it becomes a force for good or evil. However, the machinations behind who designs it and how that's created and the reasons that they keep updating it and using some of the things that we get from it, for example, our data, are things that are beyond most consumers. So, we're trying to raise a sense of awareness of that, but not overwhelm people to think that you have to take on the Metas or the X's and Mr. Musk and all of the things that are driving some of those platforms. But again, really use this technology that I think is sometimes underutilized, that in our skull, to actually take back the control that we can around how we use it. Obviously, we're using technology right now. I would suggest that is digitally nutritious. It is a force for good. But there are, with any tools, different ways of using those that maybe aren't necessarily in the greatest good of most communities and people.
And the explosion in the digital world over the last 20, 25 years has been driven, you've said, by people's desire to connect with other people.
Well, initially, I think, the people who were designing chatboards and parts of the internet were looking to be able to connect bigger groups of people more easily and share information and data. The way that has evolved has meant that there are ways that then shifts and shapes because of how humans behave, right? We have all of these different needs. We have this very, very complex brain that is constantly seeking out connection, but also avoiding pain usually. So the opportunity to scroll and to distract ourselves or to try and gather, squirrel away bits of information is present as well. And again, that kind of then comes with a lot of the kind of bigger questions in psychology, like what's meaningful? What is our purpose? What are we here for? How am I going to spend the 90 years maybe that I have on the planet in a way that is empowering me and making me feel generally better than it does making me feel bad?
I'm curious, what role does dopamine, the pleasure chemical, play in all of
Oh,
this?
that's a really tricky one. So look, people love to blame dopamine or put, the shift the focus onto dopamine around technology. Dopamine is actually the molecule of movement. It's the thing that had us get up and chase the prey and get the food that we really needed to survive. What it also does is have pathways through different parts of our brain that do motivate us, and their reward pathways. So when we use technology and we see our likes or we see our friends and we feel connected, we do get these tiny squirts. And I have to say that they are tiny. Sometimes people try and say it's like cocaine. And I'm like, it's not really like cocaine. Cocaine is far greater in the dopamine kind of boost that you get than from seeing your friend's new baby on Facebook, right? We really have to be careful we're not comparing those things. But within that digital media, we do get primed to want to have more of those little spikes and get more of those little squirts into our brain so that it helps us feel good. And because we're then primed to want to be feeling like that, some of the other activities that maybe don't come with those little rewards and those opportunities for connection can sometimes feel less exciting. Let's less rewarding, less delicious. So that, especially for young people where they're wiring their brains into having these kind of quick squirts in the form of, 15-second videos and little snippets of information, rather than being able to sit with and pay sustained attention, I guess is then where we're seeing some of the problems. And, it's easy to kind of point our fingers at the youths, rather than saying, a lot of adults that I work with and the parents of teenagers that I work with are having very, very similar problems too.
Yes, it really is a cross-generational thing. But just on teenagers, a cohort that are usually demonized for their ubiquitous use of all things digital, like smartphones, tablets and gaming and whatever. I heard you use a terrific term, which is a play on the word teenager. It's called screenager. This is brilliant. Brilliant.
Screenager. It's not mine though. Douglas Rushkoff, who's an absolute legend of basically popular culture. How would I sum him up? He's really a technologist. I think he's an incredible scholar and writer. He coined the word screenager in 1997. So if absolutely not, not mine. I love to use it, but sometimes that is also used quite demeaningly these days. That adolescence again is something that we have created, but teenagers are a product of capitalism. So, we've got to sometimes be careful how to use it, but it is an absolutely fantastic one.
And then there's the stat that blew my mind. 97% of teenagers are using digital media every single day.
Yeah, well, I mean, schools sometimes require it, right? So we're not just talking about smartphones and being on TikTok, we're talking about laptops for learning. And in Australia, at least, when I started this research, we had a thing called the Digital Education Revolution, where our government at the time started handing out laptops to everybody when they were in year 9, so about the 14, 15-year-old mark. And what we worked out was that kids were really prepared for these. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. Teachers, however, were still doing things like, let's make a newspaper article in a Word document that looks like a newspaper. So totally asynchronous to the kinds of things that we could have been doing, like creating wiki pages or collaborative tools. So when we started handing out all this technology, and then obviously the advent of smartphones, really the mobility of it and the ability for parents to kind of keep an eye on their kids was something that we've all kind of jumped on and adopted. So it's a tricky one, because it's not about screen time. Usually it's about the screenome, like the genome. How do you use technology? What's that really kind of specific, individualized profile of your technology use? And I guess the analogy that I often use is around the digital diet and looking for things that are more digitally nutritious, things that are amplifying the best parts of how we can connect and minimizing some of the risk-taking and nefarious kind of bits of it.
Well, Jocelyn, I'm really glad you brought it up, because I wanted to come to digital nutrition, which can offer us a solution to help us foster a healthier relationship with digital media, devices and apps or whatever. With that in mind, can you spell out for us what exactly the 3 M's are?
Yeah, look, I kind of consider these to be sort of like little principles that if you apply before you engage in digital technologies, especially when it comes to leisure, right? To think about, is this activity mindful? Is it meaningful? And am I doing it in moderated ways? So just to expand a little bit, mindful is really thinking, putting our brain into the gear of, what am I looking for? What am I seeking? How am I using this in a way that is aligned to my values and my purpose? So I'm not just in this kind of zombie scroll where as soon as I get a moment, I avoid my feelings and I go and have, dopamine snacks. Meaningful is all about, is that aligned, to my purpose and values? So there's some really great research that shows us when we start following people who are, in the areas that we study or research or aspire to, that can actually have a really positive effect on our kind of well-being, because we're seeing role models, we're seeing, people in that space, we're learning through that. So really aligning to meaning. And then moderate is the final M, which is all about, am I able to moderate my time? Because time is a non-renewable resource. And even though my focus is never just about time spent online, it's about the content and context as well, it is an important factor because of that non-renewability and the fact that nobody's been able to hack the space-time continuum. So we get more than 24 hours in a day. So moderating the amount of time that we use, and moderating our responses online as well, being able to temper how we respond. Because in online communication, when there's no eye contact, we often start kind of acting out and acting in ways that we probably wouldn't if we were face to face with the other human. So that's another big piece of human computer interaction, is how not having that human, not we're on a video call, I can see you, I can see your reactions, we can connect, can really, change how things go.
Infobesity, it's a term I've heard you use, especially in relation to TikTok and ADHD online, and the tendency for people to be sidetracked by misinformation online.
Yeah, it's a term. I can't remember who came up with this one. I try and use it a little bit less now, just because I think obesity and some fat phobia and fat shaming stuff kind of doesn't speak so well to this. But I call it too much irrelevant information. And I've got a new presentation that's all about how really our brains are Paleolithic. Our brains have not changed that much in about 30,000 years. Yet the information that we're consuming and trying to process on a daily basis, almost from the moment our eyes open until the moment our eyes close, we are, really chugging through lots and lots of bits of information that are often irrelevant. They don't have any utility. And that is just kind of slowing down our mental operating system, giving us a bit of brain fog. I would hypothesize adding to some of the anxiety. And it's just not how we were designed. We were designed for very different conditions. So
Yes, it really is a point of concern. I remember reading Johann Hari's terrific book, Stolen Focus, a couple of years ago, and in it, he details his own difficult relationship with being online. He was addicted to being online. He was compelled to use social media apps and digital media and digital devices in general, and it fractured his attention entirely. And in no small measure as a result of the tricks, the bells and the whistles that the software engineers who develop the apps use in order to hook you and to keep you online. And a lot of people will be familiar with infinite scroll, something developed by a chap called Asa Raskin a few years ago in order to keep people online as long as possible, whereby you scroll and scroll and scroll and there's no end to the page that you're on. And it works because it keeps you on the app in question. And I'm wondering, with that in mind, is it a case of being mindful of your internet use when you're online in order to confront these tricks and bells and whistles so that you don't become a victim of them?
Yeah, look, I think using the technology under our skull, which in effect is what all of these, usually men, let's face it, in Silicon Valley, used to design this to begin with. So we actually have pretty much the same system to hack back against what they created. And Tristan Harris is another great example of somebody who was a part of, designing for Google, who now runs the Center for Humane Technology, also featured in Johann's book, who talks a lot about this and is, I guess, sort of like, what do you call it, when they've, found the better path to go on rather than kind of, this design. So I guess the first step, and this is probably the old commerce teacher in me, is the caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. We as consumers really need to understand what we're engaging in proactively and preventatively. So when we set up our TikTok account, when we buy that new whatever number of the iPhone we're up to these days, it's really about stopping and saying, what is the implication of this in my life? And yes, we can put certain public health warnings or systems in place to ban things. Australia now has a ban on smartphones in schools. We don't talk about teaching people how to use a smartphone well. We just say, during school hours, don't want to know about it. We can do some things to shape people's behavior, but ultimately it kind of, to some degree in countries that have a lot of freedoms, it's about freedom of choice. And so we need to and a lot of my work is just about helping people understand their brain, their own operating system, and then what happens when we integrate and introduce this technology into every area of our life. And that for me is the real concern, the context that we're constantly, searching out technology for.
I'm just wondering, what advice would you have for parents of very young children? I think we probably all have experience of going to a restaurant, for example, and seeing very small children being practically babysat by a tablet 2 inches away from their noses.
Yeah, I would say that, toddlers are not designed for restaurants, and they're also not designed for tablets. I grew up, and probably you did too. We didn't go out to dinner. Like, you went out to a Chinese restaurant maybe twice a year for something fancy. We didn't have the same cafe culture or coffee culture that I definitely have in Sydney. So it's not that I never take my 6-year-old to a coffee shop or go to, eat a meal out. But I lug around a whole bunch of colouring books, a whole bunch of crayons, usually a soccer ball under one arm. And she actually has to engage in a range of things before, if I really need to stick around and she's really getting my go, maybe the iPhone comes out and maybe there's some episodes of Bluey. But what we really need to be careful of is that we aren't, giving kids this kind of digital pacifier or digital dummy as soon as there's like, I'm bored, because quite frankly, we were bored too, and we were just told to go and play on the street until it got dark. So the nature of childhood has really changed. And I think it's Jonathan Haidt, who's the social psychologist, who's got a new book coming out. I disagree with him on some things, but, he's made some statements around, we've probably overlooked the need, like we've protected kids' physical environments a lot more than we have their digital environments, and it needs to be the other way around. We actually need to encourage kids to go and, do all those nostalgic things like climb trees and play cricket in the street and ride their bikes, until sunset, and actually place much more focus on what they're doing and consuming and some of the risks through digital media, especially as we have more sophisticated technology and the rise of, AI and deepfakes and the misinformation that we're being bombarded with, which again has really sort of only shown up and really is changing my work over the last couple of years, that this is a whole new level of, I guess, threat and concern that we need to be cognizant of. Parents are also really exhausted. So there's no one quick fix. There's no like download this app or have this many minutes of screen time and only watch this thing. It's a very, very complex process to get right when there's actually no right way. There's not the research to show what the right way is. And no two families are alike. We've got, different kids of different ages. There's gender differences in what kids like to do online. And then we've got a whole generation of young people and even adults who are working out that they're quite neurodivergent, and people whose brain works in different ways, and ADHD, as you said, can really have a different impact on our digital diet and the way we get certain hyperfocus and things like that within those online spaces.
Is there research going on right now into the compulsive use of technology in various different societal cohorts?
We do tons of research. The problem is we do tons of not really good research, and we ask really, really bad questions around screen-based media use. So an article that came out a couple of days ago, last week or something, was all about how screen time at age 1 was predicting outcomes at 2 years and 4 years around language and social skill development. Now, when I looked at this research, I actually did a story on Instagram about it this week because I printed the article out. That's how old school I am. They asked one question about screen time, and it was a self-report of parents saying, how much time did you spend on a digital device? Not what device, what content, why, what was the context? Was it, a really rainy day and you couldn't go to the park like you had planned? So the fact is that people are really bad at self-report, and asking measures of how much time did you spend, again, hides so much of the richness of what we are doing on screens, that we really need to get better at how we research. So tons of research, a lot of it not so great. And there's also a bit of a replicability crisis in that a lot of people with their research take big data sets, take a chunk and cherry pick chunks of it, and then say, see, look, there's a problem, as opposed to pre-registering, this is all a bit nerdy, but pre-registering, saying, this is our hypothesis, this is what we're trying to do. We're telling you before we even collect the data so that this is what we're looking for. And then I could pick up, that pre-registered study and then go and try it myself. And if we can replicate things and we're finding similar outcomes, that's where the evidence really lies.
Do we have a consensus on a definition for digital addiction?
Yeah, look, I think the only thing that we've arrived at a consensus in is that using the word addiction gets a lot of clicks and likes on articles about this stuff in a way that's saying problematic use wouldn't.
Right.
The word even within the DSM, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, there's a whole paragraph that says we have avoided using the word addiction in this, quite important kind of book for many years because of how polemic it is and because that it's a really very pointy end of what we're talking about. So I think we overuse that word, and it is kind of like a common word for anything that's a bit of a guilty pleasure. There is certainly sort of more research that points to internet gaming disorder or gaming addiction and looks specifically at the use of video games. But when we're talking about addiction to a digital device, I think that's like tricky and very vague. I kind of use, and purposely in a provocative way, the analogy that a device is really like a hypodermic needle or a syringe, that it's delivering you the thing that you're after. And the thing that you're after is probably connection with other people or connection with a community, maybe through a game or maybe through a Discord server. And yeah, maybe it's compulsive and maybe it's interrupting other aspects of your life, but it's not actually the device, it's the platform. And then the people or the thing that you're getting out, those psychological needs that you're getting met by being in that space. So, I don't believe that a smartphone is addictive per se. I think a smartphone connected to the internet with social media apps downloaded is probably more of what we're talking about.
Jocelyn, before I let you go, can we revisit the 3Ms one more time so as people can take away the key elements of digital nutrition from this discussion?
So I say apply before scrolling, being mindful, having meaning and alignment to your purpose in what you're doing online, and then moderate both the time that you're spending and how you respond to others in online spaces.
Well, so much great information and actionable advice, and certainly advice I could do with putting into practice myself. Jocelyn Brewer, cyber psychologist, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.